Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I know it's a little later in the day than we normally do a webinar, but we wanted to get a couple of them done today before some of the things that are coming up at the end of this month for some of you. Welcome to the Extending SX and CSD with Web Services. My name is Rick Sundahl, and as you know, it's Grey Wolf Systems is who I'm with. I'm going to go through quite a few slides, and I probably will get done before the hour. So I'm expecting questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you ask them on the chat, I'll be keeping an eye on that. Hopefully try to address them as they come up. Otherwise, we'll address them at the end. If we don't have any questions, we'll let you go early and hopefully not take up too much of your day, because I do appreciate your time that you're spending on this. As I said, it is being recorded. It'll be on a website as soon as possible on that. So if you want to share it with somebody else or review it yourself, you'll be able to do that at a later date. Let's go ahead and get started here. The agenda that I've got is pretty basic. The majority of where I'm going to spend the time is in the section called Objectives, where that's going to be the meat of this. This is meant for you. So I do not have a script. I do not have something that I'm going to be reading to you. It's going to be something I'm doing as I go. So if there are questions, if you get confused, please let me know. But the intent of this is to have a session for you, not for me. So let's go ahead and get started. An introduction. Those of you, I think quite a few of you do know who Grey Wolf Systems is, but let me go through that real quick here. Grey Wolf Systems, we have been involved in the SX arena for quite a while. I'm going to go through that here in just a second. But we focus on primarily working with trading partners. And we really focus on only three, if you include CSD as being a separate from SX, as being three different types of ERP solutions. My background is that I came from distribution. I have a few designations behind my name, three-letter acronyms at the bottom here. I'm a certified management accountant, blockchain solutions architect, computer professional certified, and a strategic certification that came from the IMA along with the CMA. I've got a business background, but I've also got a technical background, and I'm going to try, if I can, this is going to be somewhat of a technical session, and I'm going to ask some questions of you as well to find out your background, but it's going to be technical with the hopefully that I'm going to be slanting it that we can talk about how do we apply it to business and how do we take it to the next step in business. A little bit of the timeline of how we got into web services. We've been doing SX. I left R&D Systems back in 1992, actually 1991. And when those were all going on, we were trying to figure out what we were doing. In 1995, we got our first SX customer. So we've been involved with the SX world for a very, very long time. We had our first API customer. We're going to talk about the definition of API versus web services, those kinds of things. But our first API customer, we've been doing it since 2006. So for 13 years, we've been doing APIs, and you're going to see that they're pretty robust at this point. We did join Tug in 2010. That doesn't mean that was the first time we were involved in Tug. There was a hiatus there where at the time NextTrend wasn't allowing any kind of third parties to be involved with Tug. From about 2000 to 2010, there was a real drought there. But we did join in 2010, and we were one of the first sponsors outside of those that were Infor or NextTrend certified partners. We got involved with Tug in 2010. And then we actually created the web services back in 2016. So we've been doing the web services for 3 years now. And then we got involved with CSD through the cooperation of a CSD customer. We saw that a lot of people were going to go to CSD, not saying everybody is, but the cloud approach we needed to address with the web services for the solutions that we had out there. So our first CSD customer was last year, and we've been growing that. We've had several CSD customers since then, and I will go into a little bit of the differences of what we do with CSD versus what we do for SX or the web UI. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions as far as what technologies and those kinds of things. So bear with me on that aspect if you have some questions on that. APIs, this is 2015, according to Forrester Research, APIs are perhaps the most critical technology in digital business design. we've been doing APIs since 2006, and when they came out in 2015 saying this, it was kind of like, duh, we've kind of known that. But we're really excited that they're starting to see this groundswell of APIs and ultimately with web services, and I'll talk about the differences here shortly. But that's kind of where we're starting on this whole thing is that APIs have become very mission critical to all businesses, all digital businesses. Now, before I get started any further, I do want to I want to ask a poll here, and give me just a second to bring it up. And this poll is just purely to help me understand what kind of audience I have, how technical we need to get on this session. If you guys are technical, and don't be afraid to say that you don't have a technical background, but I want to know how technical I should get on this, and whether it's more of a business side or if it's actually going to be more of a technology side. And it looks like we've got almost everybody. We've got half of you voted, still a little bit better. So we're up to 75%, a couple more probably, and I'll shut down here in about a second. Okay. Let's go ahead. We've almost got everybody. I'm going to end the polling and share it with you. So as you can see, we're more of a technical slant on this. That being said, I'm going to get a little propeller head on some things and expect you to ask some questions that are technical in nature as well. So let's go ahead and keep moving on here. Let's get back to the slide deck. I want to start out with some terms and definitions. This is the most boring part of the session that I have today. But I do need to go through them because there's some debate going on in the industry about some of the things I'm going to be talking about. And this debate is important, but not as important as everybody making it out to being. First of all, what are APIs? Application Programming Interface. Because most of you are technical, I'm assuming you've understood this. There's an organization called Programmable Web, and programmableweb.com is where we've actually registered our APIs for SX out there. APIs really are, like the name sounds, Application Programming Interface. So it's a programming interface for applications, meaning applications can talk to each other at the programming level. It's not meant for end users. It's not like ODBC, where ODBC is really meant for an end user to access data. It's really meant for applications to be able to communicate amongst themselves. That being said, what's the difference between it and web services? Well, web services are, I'm not a huge fan of Wikipedia, don't get me wrong, but it's a good starting point to at least discuss and start with a definition. That web services are really, in our world, the wrapper around the APIs. So the APIs are going to sit on your SX box, or for that matter, they'll sit on your CSD box as well, which is in the cloud, and we'll get into the details of the technology behind the two differences. And then the web services wrap around those APIs and become exposed to anybody that can consume those web services. It becomes an easier way to consume and allow for the APIs to be utilized within an application environment. That creates a whole set of discussions now. What is REST? Everybody talks about REST. To make a clarification here, REST, or representational state transfer, is not an architecture. It's not a protocol. It's an architecture. It's something that's a style. It is not something that is set in concrete. There are no rules associated with it. It's purely a style of doing things. It's really a way of consuming APIs or having RESTful APIs, and opposed to SOAP, which is Simple Object Access Protocol. That's going to have a specific set of protocols that are being used, and it has neutrality and independence to allow for that technology to be used. It's more broad. It's more open source, if you will. That, again, also being said, where does that get into? Why would you do REST versus SOAP? Well, quite honestly, the bottom line of this whole thing, you can read this as well as I do, but realistically, it really doesn't matter if you have REST APIs or SOAP APIs or XML or JSON or whatever. It really doesn't matter. The objective is, how do I get this done? And is there one that's better than the other? Well, if you read this, it talks about that REST is a style, so there's no criteria by which you adhere to on that, whereas SOAP is a protocol. So you can actually have a RESTful environment that's not consistent. One set of RESTful APIs would be different than another set of REST APIs, and that ends up being totally inconsistent, incongruent as you're going through this. So who really cares whether it's REST or SOAP? So if anybody is trying to sell you on the idea of whether, someone asks, hey, is this a REST API or is this a SOAP API? It really doesn't matter. Now, that being said, we happen to use SOAP APIs. We can convert them into REST, but that doesn't make any sense to do that because it's real simple for us to create the SOAP and they can be consumed appropriately. All right, getting past all those definitions now, let's talk about what we're really here for. And the objective is, if you really ask the right question, what are you looking for? Why are you even on this call? Why are you even looking at this? Well, the objective is to have an affordable and secure way to query, insert, and update, or for that matter, be able to read and write to your back office data, specifically SX and CSD. That's the functionality, is the query, the read and write, in an intuitive manner. It needs to be intuitive because you may be consuming it yourself, and if it has to have a whole bunch of documentation associated with it, you got a problem. So if we all agree that this is really kind of what you're looking for, let's use this as a basis of what we're going to talk about today. Let's go through those 4 words right there: affordable, secure, has functionality, and is intuitive. And let's talk about each one of those and compare and contrast them to some of the alternatives you have in the world that you're in. So first, let's talk about the functionality. Functionality, what does that really talk about? That talks about what's the architecture, what are some of the features and functions, is it scalable or not? We're not going to get into the security, we're not going to get into the intuitive aspect or the pricing. We're just going to only talk about what does the technology do and what's available to you. Now, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time in demo in this area, so let's start there. So if we look at the Grey Wolf website, and you will be able to see all of everything I'm showing you will be in our website, including pricing. You'll be able to see all this yourself afterwards as opposed to just listening to me on this. Let's go into web services. I'm going to go to the SX Enterprise for right now. And in here, there's a couple of buttons that I want to talk about real quick, and I'll go back over to the CSD and show the difference. The letter talks about the idea of licensing. So when I get into the pricing, there is a progress license. When you purchased SX for on-premise, you purchased a license for Progress under the SX license that allows you to use Progress only for SX application. If you want to go write a tool crib or an HR application that's using Progress, you can't use the Progress you got with SX for that. Your licensing isn't there. That's what that letter is related to from the VP of Progress talking about licensing. We've done that for you, and our APIs do support the appropriate pricing for Progress on that. And that's what that letter is related to. We'll come back to the listing here in just a second. But let's go back a screen now, and let's go look at the Cloud Suite distribution. Same concept, but you don't have the actual same set of APIs, so you don't have to worry about the licensing. Because in CSD, what you're going to use is you're going to use the Ion APIs for your basics. Why is that? That's because Infor does not allow Grey Wolf or anybody else or you to be able to load any software in a cloud environment. In fact, that's one of the biggest reasons why a lot of people aren't going to cloud. I was at one of the TUG meetings, and there was someone who'd said, no matter what, I'm never going to CSD because I don't want to be in the cloud for my ERP solution. Well, that's your opinion, but there are some people that are. If you're going to be in that world and you're going to go to the cloud and you believe in that, you're going to get the Ion APIs, and that replaces the Grey Wolf APIs in an on-premise environment. So you're going to have a little less cost. I mean, you're going to be paying for it with the Infor Ion APIs, but then the web services wrapper around that expose that technology and make it what we're going to come back to the other, which is the intuitive aspect. We'll talk a little bit about that. So for our discussions today, I'm going to stay focused on the on-premise because I can talk to both of those. But when I say APIs, keep in mind it could be the Ion APIs that we're talking about if you're a CSD customer today or planning on being that in the future. When I click on the listing, what I'm seeing here are all of the APIs that we've completed. Now, I'm not going to get into too much detail of the naming structure from an intuitive perspective because that's a whole other part that I'm going to talk about today. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, what we have done is we have created an architecture of our naming where the first part says what area are we talking about. We've got, for all practical purposes, we've got general, those are broad, items, we've got purchasing, we've got sales. We do have, in the SX world, we do have some service and some WT aspects. Those are just things we just started to dabble in. They are not as broad brushed as what we've done with the others. The second part of the naming structure is in the backside. So for example, we've got extract in this one. We've got insert. We've got list. We've got select. We've tried to use the naming structure that's very similar to the SQL query SQL language that basically says, what am I doing with this? So I'm working with items, I'm going to do an insert. Working with items, I do an insert or update with that. I have items, I'm going to do an update. I'm going to have items, I'm going to do a select, or I'm going to do a list. So the last part says, what are we getting from it? And then the middle part talks about the specific element that we're talking about. So if I look at items product insert, that's going to be inserting an ICSP record. If I look at items warehouse product insert, that's going to be creating an ICSW. So the naming structure is such that it goes based off of the basic grouping, the final functionality that you're doing with it, and what are you doing it to is in the middle. So if we come down to this, we've got, for example, sales customer select. That's going to bring back one customer. And we'll get into, I'll show a little bit more on that. The second part of what I talk about is that there are two types of APIs out there. There are data level APIs, and then there are application level APIs. The data level APIs are kind of what you can see from an ODBC perspective if you're using that, or if you're using a progress or a results report, or you're doing the quick and dirty, those kinds of things as a general rule. That's what you're talking about, is pulling data, and you're consuming it with a client application. So our data level really is fairly straightforward from that perspective. But what's more important is that we've got also application level types of APIs. And what do those mean? Those are things where you can't get it from a data. If I want to go get customer pricing, there is no table out there to go get customer pricing. It's based on some functionality that's happening, and it's being called on the fly. The biggest difference between this and, say, a flat file approach is this is real time. So it's actually getting customer pricing. So if I go to sales customer pricing select and look at that API, it's actually getting customer pricing immediately. Now, we'll talk a little bit more and show some of that to you. What does the WSDL, XML, and JSON mean? WSDL is web services definition language. XML is pretty straightforward. JSON is the Java level. And I'm going to look at the WSDL aspects, and let's look at the customer select. If I click on the WSDL, it tells me if I pass information like a company number, a customer number, and an API key. We will get into API key here in a minute. If I pass those three parameters, the results set comes back with these fields that are going to come back to me and then can be consumed by my application that I'm writing. That application that I'm writing, we call it an adapter. Those adapters now can actually do the functionality. In and of itself, the APIs do nothing. It requires an adapter to do that. Well, I can write an adapter directly against APIs, or I can write an adapter against web services. Why would I want the adapters to be different between those two? Well, in this web service, I'm calling an API, but I don't have to worry about all the structure and all the command structures. That's been done by the web services, has created this inner middleware, if you will, that allows me to consume it and work a lot easier, where my control and my commands are a lot easier, and they actually sit in an HTML command string as opposed to necessarily having to write actual code. We'll again talk about that as far as the intuitive aspect. But so you can actually see in our listing, when you go to the web services listing and pull that up, you're actually looking at what you're calling. This is actually exposed to everybody, and this is the actual web services right now that you call. So this website is what you're actually calling when you consume the web services that are communicating with the APIs. Now, one of the things we've done, everything you can see to this point, you can actually see on our website. I'm going to go into my account. I'm going to log in, and you would not see everything on your login that I'm going to see, because I can see it across all kinds of customers. And why can I see it across all kinds of customers? Is because I have to be able to support you, and if you have a question, I can see what's going on with that. But under the Web Services API's menu structure, I have a few things I want to talk about. We'll talk about the Web Services keys here in a minute. We will also talk about the sample code and the API history. What I do want to talk about is the SX tester. Why did we create a tester? The tester was to prevent finger pointing. What that means is I can actually run a mini adapter. The tester is a mini adapter that's calling against the APIs and will actually show me what's happening. If there is a problem where you're writing some code and it's not giving you the results you want, the prices aren't right or something along those lines, if you can reproduce it in the tester, that's on us. We need to fix it. If you can't reproduce it in the tester, then that's on the code. Whoever wrote the code's got to fix it. It's at the adapter level, not the API or the web services level. So let's go look at, under here, let's go look at the sales customer select that we were talking about before. And before I jump into that, I have got a little, you guys are going to laugh because we've got customers out there still running on 5, so I demo in 5 to say that we can support 5 up through the current version of Web UI. That's not a problem. But let's go to ARSC, and if we go into 151, you're going to see some information here on this customer. You can see the name is 24/7 Couriers. If I go back over here, put in the company number, put in the customer number, and say continue, you're seeing this information. So I have 24/7 Couriers, San Carlos Avenue, so forth. Now this is a hit and run world. If I go over, and I don't have record locking on this side, but let's change this to Santa Carlos. Oops, got to put space in there. Avenue. And then I press go. And I come back over here, go back a screen and continue. And you're going to see real time that data has been changed. And that's all coming from a browser. This tester is pulling that information from the APIs that's sitting on the SX box, coming into the browser, and can be consumed now by any kind of application, whether it be .NET, whether it be some sort of a Java code, PHP. It could be almost any kind of programming language you're used to. You can now consume this information. That takes it that it's architecture independent because it's a web service that's available to any kind of code that you want to write it in. Now that's a simple little one from a tester perspective. Let's go back here and go back another one, and let's go look at pricing. So we're going to go to Sales Customer Pricing Select. Now, before we jump into that, let me go over here and go to OEIP. That's the ultimate test. We're going to do Warehouse 10, Customer 10, 151, Product 1-001, Unit of Measure is each, and you're going to see our pricing here has a $187.50 as the total price, and our list price is 90. Again, don't trust our database per se; it's the test database. So we're going to go to Company 1000, 1-001, Company or Warehouse 10, Customer. I can apply ship tos and quantities if I want to look at quantity breaks, but if I don't, it's going to do the basics. And here you're seeing the same pricing. You're seeing the price of $187.50, a base price of $150, and a list price. And let's just pull this up so that you can see this and compare and contrast. These are the same pricing pieces that come from it. So if you've got multiple pricing records out there, now keep in mind, this is all based off of standard SX or Web UI, so it's going to be based on that. If you've got modifications, we may have to create a custom API to support your custom pricing. But assuming that you haven't done that, this pricing is all available to us. Now, switching over to the CSD side, what you get from a CSD side is that you actually get the same kind of logic. What we've done is we've taken the APIs that came from CSD and taken pieces and parts, plugged them into our web services architecture. So if you're on-prem today and you're using Sales Customer Pricing Select for your pricing on, say, an e-commerce website, and then you go over to CSD, all we have to do is change how those web services call the APIs. We call a different set of APIs, but then everything, the code thereafter, all runs as the same because it uses the exact same structure, so that now it's a seamless environment to switch from SX to CSD. That's the basics of what I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about the updates now. Because we have a cloud environment to this, and because the APIs are sitting out on your server, we have the technology to be able to update those APIs automatically. So if there's a bug or an enhancement that needs to be addressed, we can actually, on a regularly scheduled basis, upgrade your APIs accordingly, and then everything will flow through the web services appropriately at that point. So not only do we support multiple versions, but we're able to stay consistent on that, and everybody's on the same version. That's why we went to this cloud approach in web services, was because we were supporting so many versions back in 2006 that became a nightmare trying to support all those. Now we can support them, and we support everything actually from version 5.x all the way up through because of the architecture that we have. Scalability also comes into play because this is a hit and run. The scalability is going to be driven by your box and calling those things. It actually runs as an app server. So it's if you are running the Infor APIs and you're running our APIs, they can run side by side because they're running two different app servers. And if you all of a sudden start having a big hit on some items, let's say if someone's going and do some cataloging information, you can start to see what's causing that because it works like a user does. And you may have to throw more memory or processor at your box, but that's all available because there's no limitations on the software side on how big this is going to get. It's acting like a headless user. So in one aspect, you got to kind of be careful what you ask for because you could end up be asking for a lot of stuff. But if you need to ask for it for business reasons, that's all available to you and can work forward on that. When you sign up, you will get sample code. We do provide sample code for it. That this is not a customer installable product. Reason why is because it's a progress-based piece. There's too many things. There's encrypted code that has to be brought on, compiled. That's all because of the environment that Progress creates for us. So it's actually going to have an install functionality that we have to provide for you. We estimate that typically 5 to 8 hours. Usually it's more like about 3 hours, but it depends on what kind of access we have to it. But once that's installed, if you want to do this yourself, you or a third party will have sample code and instructions. If you want to see, you'll have this available to you. If you go look at under your server that's available to it, and we'll talk about this here in just a second, you'll see the API update history, and you can see when we've done and updated the APIs all through the My Account. You're going to have multiple instances of your environment. You should have installed both in your test and live environment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. In fact, that's a great segue into the next piece that I wanted to talk about, which is security. So how do we make sure that only the right people have access to the data that should have it? First of all, is an API key. It's a large key. I think it's something like 50, 64 characters, something like that. And I'm going to show you here in a minute. What will happen is you're going to set up your firewall to only allow our IP addresses to come through the firewall and only access it through a port. The app server has a specific port on it, and that's how we're going to have access to your APIs accordingly. And then you have user control that says what the users can do. Can they read? Can they write? Do they have access to the live or test? And you see that in the last one. Do they have live or test access? And you could set up for the DDoS, which is denial of service that can happen from hacking. You can specify those kinds of things to prevent those hacks to happen. So how is that done? And keep in mind, this is only being done on your on-premise aspect in the sense that you're going to have an API key, but you're going to have an instance that we're going to set up that's going to call the CSD APIs. That will be the difference here on the server when we set it up. We'll specify that you've got those APIs. That's the only difference between CSD and SX. So if you look at it, here's the key for the demo that I'm using right now that's going against our demo database. Excuse me. And if you used that key and wrote your own application, you would have full access, you would have read-write capability, and you'd have a throttle. Now, you won't see the full versus light on your screen. Why am I seeing that? Because I'm an administrator for all of our customers. What's the difference? A full access means that you have given this to yourselves or to a third party to write your own applications. Light is used for only Grey Wolf applications, and it's only a licensing difference. It's a pricing, and we'll get into pricing here in a minute, but that's the only difference is it's a licensing issue. It's not a technology issue. So if you have full rights, that means you can have a third party write it. Otherwise, only light would be available for the Grey Wolf applications. Then, if you can see if I hover over the question mark, you're going to see that it defines what rights you have. And those rights would either be read or write. And in the read or write, you're going to have, and deny is another option, but that's kind of nebulous. You could delete it if you wanted to. But that says, okay, for a given database, can I read and write to it? And then the throttle piece is all associated with restrictions to prevent DDoS. So if there's any kind of hacking going on where they're trying to throw a bunch of traffic into that port, this restricts that and puts a throttle on it. You may have to turn it up if you've got applications that get shut down because it's trying to do something that's a very large kind of a thing. Like in our EDI world, if you're trying to do a product type of file, an 832, it can require a fairly large throttle just because it's asking for a lot. But if you're just doing a standard e-commerce, you may not need that. So you're going to be able to have access to these keys to determine what you can and can't do to the applications. All right. That being said, the second part of the security, or we talked, I think, most of all the security, user control, the firewall access. The biggest difference between the security that we've got and the security you're going to have for the CSD world is that same security is going to be there, but it's going to just be calling the CSD APIs. Okay, let's talk about intuitive. Here's the biggest hitting item. If you look at the listing, this source on this came from the API technical documentation from Infor. The Infor Ion APIs for pricing, let's just take pricing as an example. You have got 7 different types of APIs, and if you look at the naming structure of those APIs, are they logical? Do they make sense? Whereas we've got 3. We've got sales customer pricing select. We've got sales customer pricing list. Well, the difference between that is a price for one item versus a grouping of items. Or if you have quantity pricing list. So we've got 3 APIs, and I'm not sure that how intuitive it is to know if you're writing your own code to go against the Ion APIs. We've taken that under ourselves to pick and choose those and put them into the appropriate categories for what we have. In addition to that, there is no tester, and it's not being done from a sense of the best way that you can actually look at the code is we use a third-party tool to go look at that, and we're looking at the JSON. This is a sample of what it looks like. This is how you actually see the information. So I use the analogy of driving a car. If you are a coder and you want to work with some sort of a tool, in this case it being web services, it's like driving a car and walking in for the first time into a car and wanting to test drive it. When you test drive a car, you don't have to be told that a key goes here or you press the start button. You don't have to be told what the steering wheel does or the turn signals or the pedal on the right and the pedal in the middle. You know those are brake. You know those are gas. You know all those things because it's intuitive. We've tried to do the same thing with our web services is we've made those web services intuitive to the developer and make it so that you can get through the code faster and easier. What's the pricing? So we're into the 4th one. You have an activation of $400. It's a one-time. That's going to be to activate your environment. Now, if you go and you upgrade, you're going to have another activation fee. You may even have an installation fee as well. That's to be able to set it up for maybe if you changed your IP addresses, or those are the things that happen because the environment of where the APIs are have changed. Then you're going to have an annual subscription of $500 a year. That is our progress licensing piece. We've sliced it out. It's different for our other ERP solution providers. And if you are CSD, the 2nd and 3rd bullet are not required for you on that. You'll still have an activation, but you won't have an installation because you're obviously running it on the Ion. You won't have an annual subscription fee because you're paying for it with the Ion application subscription. And then you're going to have a choice of whether you do the annual subscription, which is the full version, or the light version. And again, the difference between the light and the full version is purely of, are you doing it yourself, or is Grey Wolf doing it with our applications? That's what's really the difference between those two. If you look at this pricing, And I know that Infor prices their APIs negotiated. It changes. But I have heard numbers that they're in the 5 figures. If you look at what you're paying for it in the Ion world, it's going to be a little bit different as well. It's going to be more expensive in that world as well. So keep that in mind. We've tried to make this as affordable. That's why we've been doing this since 2006 and really been doing the web services recently, is because we have made it so affordable, and we've got several customers that are betting their businesses on these kinds of technology right now and today. Okay, so how do you get started? How do we take all this stuff that we're talking about and use it? Let's throw the business aspect to it now. Well, first of all, you have 4 options of how you do this. 1, you could use a Grey Wolf application. I'm going to get into that here in a minute. 2, you could write your own application. You could actually write it yourself and have your own coders, in-house coders do it. Or you can hire someone to create an application that you have for yourself. Or you can actually contract with a third party. We've done that with some third parties. For example, guys like Second Phase and Computer Pundits and some other e-commerce solutions. If you have a third-party application that does, say, you don't want to do TWL, you want to create your own barcoding solution, you want it to integrate with SX, we can have this available to you, and they would then have all the same things you would. You become our customer, but they then can modify their code using the CSD web services, or for that matter, the SX web services, and they can actually then integrate it for you at a very affordable price to have that available to that aspect. This is kind of the vision that we have of how this all plays together for Grey Wolf. We really focus on the trading partner relationship. So what we've done is we've taken those web services that wrap around the distribution system, in this case SX or CSD, wrap those web services around it. Now we've exposed it. Now, you know, be careful what you ask for. You just might get it, because now we can do anything we want. What we're focusing on is e-commerce and EDI. So EDI is system-to-system integration, where we're working with trading partners. We're going to pass that through our solution called Partner Connect. Or we can do it through our e-commerce solution, which is through Magento. That's going to be a user to a system integration. That's going to be real time. It's not going to be passing data back and forth on a part-time basis. And in the Partner Connect world, we're doing that real time from our server to SX. We're not passing an X12 file. We get the X12 file, we map it out, and then we put it right into SX, as opposed to sending another file that has to be consumed by the EDI module. So we've simplified the process and not made it so difficult to work with. And then the last piece is NewSync, which is our mass maintenance. If you want to do bulk updates or do a quick query against the database, that is allowed through NewSync, and you may have heard about it in the sense that it's very affordable, something that you can actually run as a user. Let's get into details on each of those 3. And by the way, we do have a webinar coming up on some of these we're going to drill down into each one. Partner Connect, it's EDI and non-EDI documents, it's X12, it's email, it's XML, it's all kinds of different types of files that you have out there that's fully integrated with SX and CSD, uses the web services, and we host it. You don't have to buy any software, so how you pay for it is you pay for a setup charge, and you pay it for transaction. If you want to see the pricing on that, that's all on our website. We are fully transparent on our pricing, totally different than a lot of software companies out there. So if you want to see the pricing on that, you should be able to find that there. Magento, we're based on the Community Edition, and we've got it integrated with SX and CSD. It's based off of a charge for transaction fees, because we're hosting it. We charge for orders that are placed and payments that are made. We're not going to charge you tens of thousands of dollars up front, and I'll just steal a little thunder. We charge a $400 activation fee, and we charge a minimum of $30 a month for up to 100 orders or transactions that are placed in a month, and then it goes up from there. So if you want to start out with an e-commerce solution that's a low-cost entry, and let's say you've already got the APIs and the web services in place, it's a very simple, no-brainer kind of a decision to get started on. We've got several that have started on it, and now becomes a win-win situation between Grey Wolf and yourselves to make that actually into a successful solution. NewSync we've talked about. The idea was to replace Supplier Link and Q&Ds and those kinds of things, and it's actually grown from that. We've even got NewSync updating Magento for the website, and again, we can get into that offline. But the bottom line is we're using the web services to update and retrieve information if we want for NewSync, so that you can actually see data before you update it, and then bring it over through a spreadsheet, drag and drop, and it updates SX with a bulk update. This could be used for updating for sales reps. It could be doing bulk updates for pricing. It could be doing a whole bunch of things in a bulk mass maintenance approach. Okay, I have gone through a whole bunch, and I wanted to leave some time for questions. If we don't have any questions, that's fine. We'll just let you go for the afternoon. But right now, I'm looking at the chat, or if you guys want to unmute yourself, I think you can unmute yourself. We will be glad to take questions at this point. I know I've gone through a lot. I've got my vital information up here, so that if you want to take something offline, feel free to do that. And follow us on Twitter and Facebook if need be. Looks like we don't have any questions. So with that being the case, I want to wish you all a great afternoon, and thanks for taking the time to spend with us, and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a great day.